Welcome to the Giving Back is Dead podcast brought to you by Scott Stover. Giving Back is Dead is a progressive, open forum for discussing next-gen giving to the arts and sustainable practices for nonprofits. For more information on Scott, myself, and our advisory services, please visit scottstoverinc.com. Welcome to the podcast, Giving Back is Dead. We're here today with Patton Hindle, who is Executive Director of Artadia. Welcome, Patton.
Thank you, Scott. Nice to be here.
We're very excited because this is the first day of Frieze Art Week. And the tradition now with Frieze Art Week is to begin with a tennis tournament for Artadia.
Yes, yeah. It's our second annual tennis tournament. We are the official kickoff event for Frieze Art Week. Sort of a fun event to get people excited at the beginning of the week before they head into all the very dense art stuff.
And as you can see, it has just begun to rain and it's cold. And I bet you think we're lucky that it just rained now.
It waited until the end of our lunch that followed our tournament. That's true, yes.
So tell me, Patton, how did it go? Are you pleased with the event?
Super pleased with the event. We have actually sell out the event almost before the tickets even go on sale. We have so many sort of individual sponsors and supporters for it, which is really great. But we also always save space for artists. So Charles Gaines played today.
Oh, he did?
Yes,
that
he plays tennis every single day.
Oh, he does? Is he good?
Yeah, he is actually quite good. And then we do a special format called Live Ball, who's one of our partners, and it's sort of like not round robin, but a quicker way of playing tennis so that the players only are playing really for an hour, and then there's spectators who get to watch, and then we all meet together for a lunch afterwards, which is really nice.
And do you know how much money you raised or not?
About $75,000.
And is that an important amount for you?
Yes, it is. Yeah, yeah.
And so the success is basically related to the amount raised?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it's also, Artadia's been around for 25 years. It's a unique format of an event that doesn't really take place anywhere else in the art world for us. So, or broadly speaking in the art world. So it's a way of also like breathing some life into a 25-year-old arts nonprofit and showing sort of a different way of engaging with folks.
Maybe you should talk a little bit about what is Artadia. For people who don't know it,
Sure.
I think you should maybe.
Yes, Artadia was founded in 1999, so 25 years ago, out of the San Francisco Bay Area, directly in response to the NEA cutting funding to artists. And so a few collectors got together and arts enthusiasts and said, we have to create some sort of solution for this. So our first award city was San Francisco. It's now considered San Francisco the Bay Area because we know that artists have moved out of San Francisco proper, given the high cost of living. So we slightly altered our maps there. But we added other cities that were outside of sort of the main populace of what you would consider to be arts hubs in the country. So most people think of Los Angeles and New York, and while those are two of the 7 cities that we serve, they were the last 2 cities that we added in 2015. So we are active in Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Houston, LA, San Francisco Bay Area, and New York City. And what we do is give unrestricted cash awards to artists. It's 3 artists in each of those cities, so 21 awards a year. And it's through a really unique process where we bring in jurors from across the country to review open applications from each of those cities. And they go through a selection process and eventually determine 5 finalists and then down to 3 awardees. And those awardees, again, receive $15,000 in cash. We do not care what they do with it. Pay your rent, make an art piece, pay for an exhibition, pay for childcare, whatever it is that is your need at that time. We believe that the artist has the right to make that choice. We also provide professional development throughout the course of their career. So we've awarded over 400 artists at this point.
It's incredible. I know it's a beloved organization among everybody. And how is it, would you say the majority of the donor support is from baby boomers?
That's a good question.
Are there a lot of next gen? Because basically we're talking about next gen giving to the arts.
Sure.
And actually, I want to say, you're one of the great people to talk to about this. Because the fact, I mean, I don't know that many people who've actually tried to begin a gallery. Yes. You created the arts section of Kickstarter, and now you're heading a very beloved nonprofit.
Thank you.
So this is, you are the person who can give us views on next gen giving to the art. And why don't we begin thinking about Artadia? Do next gens give to Artadia?
Sure. First of all, you just made me feel very exhausted thinking about all the things I've done in my career. I have held many hats in the field. I've written books too. But as for next generation giving, And Artadia's donor specifically, I think it's really a mix. We do have that sort of baby boomer generation. However, I would say we're also encroaching on sort of like elder millennial, which I guess technically I'm now a part of, as we now have claimed that phrase, elder millennial. So there is definitely that group of people within our community. They're not necessarily on our board. We do have a few younger folks on our board, but I would say our board is sort of that older generation. And that's something that we're actively thinking about as an organization. Because
Why do you think they're not on the board? I mean, we know when you look at our larger legacy institutions like Metropolitan Museum, they're having real difficulty engaging nextgen as board members. I think it is an issue. And I would anticipate that in an organization like Artadia, it would be a little bit easier to be able to engage nextgen as board members.
Yeah.
Isn't my executive producer on your board?
She's not.
Vajra?
No.
She's not.
No. She's a donor, but she's not on our board. So that's what I was going to say. In our donor circles, which we have various of those, that we do have a quite young population. And I think, to me, that's sort of like a space where we examine folks who might be ready to join our board. Our board is quite large. Our board is 27 people. And that is because we serve 7 cities, and we are a staff of 5 full-time people and 2 part-time people. So we cannot be in each of our 7 cities.
Very difficult.
So our board really works. They stand in for us when we can't be at certain events, when we're doing things in each of our cities. If a person can't travel, they are there for us and speak on behalf of the organization. For the makeup of the board, I think some of that is just like I said, it's a 25-year-old organization. So there are folks who have been deeply engaged for well over a decade on our board. And that's amazing to have, because that means they really know the organization through and through. But also with a board that size, that means that there's opportunity to bring in new folks and bring in a younger generation. And I think some of that is just also part of a leadership shift too.
And how will you do that? You know how to do this. How are you thinking of doing this?
Well, a few things. Relationships that I have, of course, people that I know or care about the arts and are interested in it, or care about directly supporting artists, which to me is something that appeals to a younger generation. I can understand why something like an organization like the Met may be having a hard time. If you're a physical space and you are tied to having exhibitions, there's a part of that yes, education is incredibly important and supportive and important for a young generation. But for an organization that doesn't have a physical space, that is really speaking to how we support an artist, and you can see how that impact of that financial gift to one of them can actually open their career, open opportunities for them in each of their cities. That is a much more compelling narrative in my mindset for a younger person. They can really see A to B to C of what it is that they're doing.
I know you've just begun at Artadia,
yes.
But do you have impact on these issues? Like, do you do impact studies following the artists for whom you've given grants and their success?
We monitor that ourselves, yes. I actually have a grant out right now asking for a data scientist to come in and support the organization, because I think we can do a better job of surveying our artists to see where they're at and use that to better drive our efforts and how we're making decisions on not just like we're not adding cities, but how deeply we're funding in each of those cities. What kind of public programming should we be doing in each of those cities? Because what an artist needs here in Los Angeles is not what an artist needs in Atlanta. And so those needs are drastically different, and we need to make sure that we're catering our message to each of our cities.
And then do you generate some kind of impact report? Or is this something you're thinking about?
That is forthcoming. It is something we are thinking about, yes. I mean, I can tell you anecdotally, 24 of our awardees have won Guggenheim fellowships. I did this data analysis myself when I started, because
so it hasn't
been
done yet.
Not in that respect, but we do research into, like, we know 6 artists are in the Whitney Biennial this year, 7 artists are in Prospect, New Orleans, which to me really speaks to the process of our jurying and how we're able to identify talent from around the country. Simultaneously, we know that curators use our site and our artist platform, and I used it before I came to Artadia, when I would travel to cities to look up artists that I should be doing studio visits with. So we know that we are a resource, for example, for the Whitney Biennial, for the curators to look through. Oh, I'm traveling to Houston, who should I meet with there? And here's a list of awardees that have gone through some sort of validation by peers in the field.
And why did you decide to join Artadia?
Oh, that's a good
and
question.
what do you think you're going to be able to do?
Sure.
What do you want to do?
So I joined Artadia, wow. So I have a long relationship to Artadia. I started my career in Boston, and at the gallery that I was at, which was called the Judy Rotenberg Gallery, which is now belonged to Abigail Goodman, who's one half of Goodman Taft, a very important curatorial and advising entity in the field now. We were showing artists coming right out of art school there, And Artadia launched its award cycle when I had just started at that gallery. So we hosted cultivation events for local donors to become aware of who Artadia was. We had artists who won the award, so I saw the impact at the very beginning of my career. And then in different stages as my career has moved on, I have engaged with Artadia in different places. So at a gallery, obviously showing many of the awardees, but then also when I was at Kickstarter, I hosted public programming in San Francisco and New York with Artadia around issues that were pertinent to artists, because my role at Kickstarter was very much about supporting directly artists, which is so similar to what Artadia has done.
So what do you plan to do, and how are you going to do it?
I think I really want Artadia to be seen as an artist services organization. So I think when you have a nonprofit, there's so much that goes into supporting individual donors alongside how that can affect your organization. But I believe that donors should be so inspired by our mission and so inspired by the work that we do that what we do speaks to them. So recentering our work around what it is that our artists need and want, to me, should be the beacon that brings folks in. So we are launching a few special initiatives. I can say one of them now. I cannot say the other one for our 25th. But we have a publication that's coming out this year that's called When We Were 25. So to mark our 25th anniversary, we decided we wanted to survey 25 of our past awardees from 1999 through end of 2023. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself at the age of 25? And they've come in such amazing formats. Like, some have been poems, checklists. Hank Willis Thomas wrote a letter to himself. Like, you can see wonderful, wonderful markers of how each artist interpreted it. And for me, I want this to be a publication that, yes, we can give out to our donors, we can sell in museum gift shops, but it's something that we give to each of our awardees as they come in, because I know it's so important for an artist to hear the words of another artist and the advice that they have. It's not like hard skills, it's more like emotional skills that come to them. And so many of our artists have been generative in their practice. This is just another way to bring the community together.
So a great idea.
Thank you.
Great idea.
Thank you.
Now, you talked to me a little bit about the issue of a lack of next-gen collectors. And I keep thinking about what you said because I hadn't thought about it before. And can you explain really, not necessarily why, but what is the impact of a lack of next-gen collectors in being able to encourage next-gens to give to the arts?
Yeah, I mean, for sure that sales don't go hand in hand, like the art market doesn't go hand in hand with philanthropy. And I think anyone who runs an organization, nonprofit organization, would say that and know that. At the same time, it's hard for an individual to understand if you are interested in art, outside of just buying art, how could you potentially have an impact? And if that first door, which is most people just think about buying art, that's the first initial step that anybody would think about. If that first door is so cost prohibitive, you feel like the whole field is already closed to you.
Yeah, it makes sense. Don't you think so?
Yeah, definitely. And like, as you know, I had a gallery for just over 2 years in Chinatown, and our model was very much to engage with younger artists, support them, give them the sort of early exhibitions, and keep their price point at that place what we felt was collectible for that next generation. Unfortunately, the economics of it just don't make sense.
And if I understood correctly, you're pessimistic about the economic making sense for this next generation to collect.
I think it's a little more difficult, yeah. I think we have so many more things that, as individuals living in America right now, we'll just keep this under the lens of America, that we have to afford and pay for, and the cost of living has only skyrocketed alongside wages not keeping up with it. So the potential disposable income that you might have is not going to match what what a piece of artwork might cost. So to that end, you're paying for student loans, you're paying for your health care, you're paying for rising rent costs. I'm also definitely in a New York state of mind when it comes to thinking about rent costs.
Well, it's the same thing here and in San Francisco, really.
Exactly, in many of our major cities. And the pandemic only heightened that. So really my initial study on this was pre-pandemic. It was as I was closing my gallery, I was very upfront about the financial burden it was to hold a gallery, but also just the lack of that young generation of collector. And it makes sense to me. You just don't have the same disposable income. So if you can't buy a piece of work, you're not automatically going to think, well, then how do I give to a nonprofit to support the arts? That's not a one-to-one. And I do think as a whole, as a field, and we've discussed this before, but that we have a PR problem, and we're not also allowing all the facets of the field to speak to each other. So like, this event today was actually fantastic. It was underwritten by many galleries. There were gallerists here, there were artists here. So you're seeing the sort of mixture of nonprofit to for-profit.
But what bothers me about this, and the idea is that we have an open discussion, is that I think part of the reason is you found the right time and the right moment.
Sure,
so
absolutely.
It's
I mean,
the
that's anything.
Frieze,
Right?
It's the Frieze kickoff.
Yeah.
How does that really fit with the mission of the organization?
Sure, totally. I mean, I think it's difficult, but I also, so while it might not be something that directly speaks to how we support an artist, although we did have artists playing today and awardees in attendance, it does also do the other side of PR, which I said is like giving Artadia sort of like a fresh coat of paint, letting folks understand that we are speaking to another generation. We do have fun. It's not always so serious. And I do think fun is important to young people too. They don't want to, there's a lot of heaviness in the world right now.
It's not fun to baby boomers? You don't want to have fun? Baby boomers
No,
don't want to have fun?
there are plenty of baby boomers who play tennis today too. I mean more that it speaks to all facets or all age groups. Yeah.
Now, the idea of the fundamental problem is PR communications. And I suppose more or less I agree with you. I agree with you in the sense, as we also have discussed, that it is for us to make the case that the arts are relevant. Is it relevant? Is it relevant to society? Is it relevant in our lives? And you basically feel that we should have some cabinet level secretary who promotes the arts. Tell me more about your idea in this.
I mean, I think we probably missed the boat on that, if I'm being quite frank.
Yeah, I think so. That's what I think.
I would say that that's where the core of the problem in America starts, is that we missed the boat on having this cabinet level seat. We don't have any policy institutes, although I will say there is one being formed in New York City right now as a nonprofit.
There is?
Yes.
What is that called?
I can look it up. Gonzalo, who used to be the head of the Department of Cultural Affairs, is one of the founders of it. So someone who came from government, who also worked at Mellon Foundation as a fellow over the last year. Sorry, this is going to take me a minute.
Well, we move on.
Okay.
What about, I was looking at, after we talked, I was looking again and I found this Americans for the Arts organization. And it seemed to me that that has as its mission to do what you say.
They do, yes. They have it as their mission.
Well, tell me more about what you think. Because I read the mission, and then I found, it was only after we discussed, I admit it.
Yeah.
And then I also saw
Was that your first time learning of AFTA?
No, but I hadn't
okay.
really paid attention. To be honest, I hadn't really thought about it.
Yeah.
Which I suppose you're right. That tells that it's a problem. And they come up with this study called Arts and Economic Prosperity Study, an economic impact study, which to me is what we should be showing. And they come up with like 12 points of why arts are essential in our society today. All of this makes enormous sense to me.
Sure.
So why is that not happening?
So unique to AFTA, they're going through a massive leadership transition, and they have been for the last sort of 4 years, I want to say. I've served on a few advisory boards for them and worked with them, yes. Wonderful people work there who are trying to do that. They're trying to merge like the film industry and with the visual arts, like put all of the creative sector together.
It really seems to make, when I looked on the website.
But they leave out galleries.
They leave out galleries?
They leave out galleries. Which
Why?
was a
Why
comment that I made, and I was sort of on their arts and business group, and it was a comment that I brought up. If you want to speak to all of the issues that affect an artist and how you create a thriving place for an artist, that has to include galleries, because that is part of how they make their income and their livelihood.
And what did they say? I mean, it seems
then
so
they started
obvious
talking,
to me.
I introduced them to galleries, and they started talking to them, but they are going through another leadership transition right now.
Because then I saw that they have 10 reasons to support the arts.
They also have like
Arts, unity, communities, and they give statistics on everything. Arts improve individual well-being, arts strengthen the economy, arts drive tourism, arts improve academic performance, arts spark creativity, arts have social impact, everything that we believe.
Yeah, I mean, look, their points are all valid and accurate. I think that they suffer from a messaging problem too.
Oh, they do.
And I think there's a lot of hope that with this transition and hopefully into a new leadership for them, that there will be an opportunity for it to live up to its mission. It is, if you ask most nonprofit leaders in the arts, we all have a relationship to AFTA, and we all hope for more. Yeah.
I didn't. Well, Kickstarter. You were head of art at Kickstarter, where you were successful to be able to engage people 22 to 44 years old. So how did you do that, and how can that carry over with other arts nonprofits?
I'll have to say that, so technically in my role at Kickstarter, my job was not necessarily to bring supporters to the arts, it was to help an artist realize a project, so help them strategically figure out how to crowdfund for something. And so I started with thinking about who my community of artists were. Primarily, the community of artists that I was working with were artists of color. And they were artists who had ideas that were relevant to social causes or certain ideas that affect society at large, but could never really get the funding from other places for it. So it's not a sellable thing. A gallery is not going to support it. To be honest, at that time, if you're an artist of color, it's unlikely you're going to get a grant for something like this, just because those doors have been historically closed, although the field is changing.
It's better
regard.
now. Don't you think it's better?
It's getting better,
yeah,
yes.
I think it's better.
Not better yet, but getting better,
Yeah.
for sure. So my role was really to bring them in, help them garner the support that they need and run projects. So I helped For Freedoms run their 50-state initiative in 2018, which was, I got Kickstarter to break all of its platform rules to let them run 52 concurrent projects. And that had 2,220 supporters to it, who were individual donors giving them money across 52 different states and cities.
And also the same 22 to 44-year-olds, do you think?
Primarily, that was the largest donor group that we had. And I think it really was that the projects were focused on an election cycle, not necessarily Democrats or Republicans, but about civic dialogue. Pope L ran a project for Flint water, so he wanted to bottle the water in Flint, Michigan, and sell it as a limited edition artwork so he could return the funds to citizens of Flint who have been deeply affected by the Flint water crisis. So it's really finding artists who had that sort of intersection in their practice, but it was never traditionally a place that could be funded. And in many ways, Kickstarter was a social practice project. It was founded by a contemporary artist.
Yeah.
It's about community engagement and giving to ideas and being a part of something. So that donor group, to me, makes sense because most young people, while you may not understand art, you understand the social cause. So art can be that can be the entry point for then you to understand what art might be or be capable of doing in that space.
So don't you think the same kind of structure can be applied to other arts nonprofits?
Absolutely, and I think there are folks who are doing this, for sure. I mean, like I said, Charles Gaines was here playing today. Charles Gaines is Moving Chains. I mean, how many decades did it take for those projects to be realized? They were originally thought of in the 70s, and they're finally realized in 2023. I mean, that is...
Why did it take so long, do you think?
Artist of color, funding for a monumental project, not having the right support, required city permits. There's just so many barriers.
It's such a powerful work.
Absolutely.
So powerful.
Absolutely, and now it's going to travel. So, I mean, I think that there are moments like that where people who didn't have an art experience could go to something and then start to understand, oh, this is about like the history of America and what we did to Black and brown people in this country.
It's very powerful. So you have been advisor to the Mellon Foundation.
Yeah, yes.
Tell me a little bit, what do you do there?
Well, I'm not anymore. I did that last year. They are conducting a large-scale research project on what an artist needs to thrive. And so they pulled together people across the country from some were professors, some were data scientists, others were folks who just worked in nonprofits in the field. For me, it was when I was in my Kickstarter role and I was working directly with artists. So I had a real sense of what the pain points were for an artist and trying to realize something or just the struggles of what their career was.
And what do you think about that experience, and what do you think, is it going to be?
I am so excited for this research to finally be concluded and the information to come out, because it's something that I intend to use in the way that Artadia continues to work.
So also real impact. This will have impact.
Yes, yeah. I mean, if we find out what an artist needs to thrive, which, I'm guessing involves healthcare, I'm guessing involves very essential needs. But then there are elements to it when, as an advisor, they're talking to us about what are the areas that we might be blind to as we conduct this research. And I said to them, I suspect that after the pandemic, as much as we wanted artists to set up LLCs to protect themselves so that if everything fell apart, they could get funding from the government, many of them never did.
Really?
Yes.
Why,
so we'll find out.
Why do you think?
From the artists that I know who didn't do it.
So why don't they do it? I mean, it's not very complicated.
I think it feels like a business hurdle for them. Like there's so much that I feel like artists and some are excellent business people, and some also know how to surround themselves with excellent business people. But for those who don't, it feels like some sort of overwhelming structure to put on themselves, which it isn't. We know it's not.
No. So you're also on the board of the Laundromat Project.
Yes, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that and why you came on that board. What do you think of the project, and what do you give as a board member, since you're an elder millennial?
I call it the LP, that's what we all call it for short. The LP is an organization that was founded over 10 years ago, and it was meant to serve primarily Black and brown neighborhoods in New York City. So it was serving the Bronx, Harlem, Bed-Stuy. Just before the pandemic, the LP recentered itself into Bedford-Stuyvesant, and it has a storefront space that anyone from the community can go into. But the LP sees artists as both change makers, but also people who are engaged in their local civic community. So many ideas are fostered out of the LP. So they have a fellowship program. The Black School, which is now in New Orleans, that came out of the LP, which is something that's now loved and revered. It's an education institute for design for people of color in New Orleans. How I got involved with the LP, I was working at a gallery in the Lower East Side, and these two young women came in with Xeroxed flyers for an exhibition that they were having in the laundromat in Harlem. And I was like, this looks awesome. Okay, yeah. They asked if they could leave their flyers out. I said, absolutely. Like, you can always bring stuff here. Had a wonderful conversation with them. That was the first time I learned of the LP. And then I was in another capacity working in the field with someone who was at Lincoln Center, who then left to go to the Laundromat Project to run their development. However, she is now the executive director of the Laundromat Project as of last year, Aisha Williams. And we stayed in touch, and she asked me to sort of sit on some host committees. I just really believed in what they were doing, and seeing the power of the folks that they were able, with not a ton of money, able to walk through what are the steps to build your business entity, how do you actually create change, how do you garner community, what are these steps that you can, and the tools that you can give to someone. And then the LP did something that was unusual, and I don't know many organizations that have done it. I know they borrowed it from the Center for Urban Pedagogy in New York, which is they did an open call for board members. And so I applied to be a board member.
Very interesting.
Turns out Kemi, who was the former ED, had me on a short list already. So it was sort of like an easy match to be made between myself and the organization. But they have maybe something that's not always the case with every nonprofit. We are very much a working board. We do a lot for that organization.
And is that important?
So. Yes, very important.
Particularly to millennials, I think, to the next generation. They want to be able to do something.
Yeah, and actually that board skews younger, I should say, too. But it's Dia Vish, who's at Creative Time, she's on the board with me. Naomi Beckwith is on the board. There are people spanning who are very serious professionals in the art world who give their time and effort to the LP. We also give funds, but we have varying levels based upon how, I guess, what your role is. If you are a professional running a nonprofit, I'm not giving the highest level of dues, but I'm giving somewhere in the middle.
I see. And you think it's important to give something?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy to give to them. I give it on, and also I do what I think every organization has learned to do. I give on a quarterly basis, so it's not all one lump sum that I have to give, so I can budget it through the year.
And finally, what do you think of legacy institutions? Will they continue to have a role? Will they be able to engage the next generation? What do you think?
I mean, they're not going anywhere. They're legacy institutions. They're all sitting on massive endowments, so hopefully they will be.
Not all on massive endowments, just the top institutions in the major cities.
We need them because they're there for
education. You do feel that they're needed.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, those larger institutions play a really important role in the ecosystem of the art world. I will say, well, I'll skip to this in a minute. I do think that they have an incredibly important role in the field, and they provide places for education. I mean, the Met, I take my kids to the Met.
Oh, you do?
Yes, all the time. I mean,
you heard Anna's story, Anna Regenskaya's story.
Actually, I didn't hear her story.
You didn't? She said that she was in high school and went to a program at the Metropolitan Museum, and it changed her life.
There you go.
And that's exactly, it gave her a kind of social mobility, and it inspired her to study art history, and voila. And she credits the education program at Metropolitan Museum.
That's amazing. I mean, I benefited from growing up in Europe. My father minored in art history. I never got to take those fun beach vacations. I was going on cultural trips every time, because we also didn't know how long we were going to live in London for, so we just tried to travel all over Europe. And so I went and saw every museum, and that's something that even my parents say today. They think it's so great that we take our son to these things. I'm we live in New York City. We have some of the greatest treasures in the world here on offer for us, and the Met is free if you're from the city. So for us, it's a no-brainer to go there, and it's interesting to see what connects with him and what doesn't at different points in his life. But I think that those cultural institutions provide a really important, they're like libraries to me. Libraries are pivotal for us as a society. So having legacy institutions is as well. I'm trying to think what I was going to say that was the alternative. Oh, I do think that there are too many nonprofits being formed, and I would say that.
You do? Mm-hmm. What do you mean? Elaborate a bit.
I think that the first instinct, and I'll say this more specifically to thinking about artists and how artists work. Mm-hmm. If an artist has a social, let's say, and again, this is from my realm of working with so many social practice-based artists, the next step is to think, well, how do I fund this if I've crowdfunded it? Okay, well, I need grants. So I should form a 501c3. There are two problems with that. One, if your art project, if the piece that you're making, the social practice work, is yours and you found a 501c3, that work is no longer your intellectual property. It belongs to the people.
Yeah.
So you've sort of lost control of that. And the other is that it creates unnecessary burdens upon that artist where they just become running an organization instead of free to be able to do their work. Yes. So there are different models, and Kickstarter was one of these, and something I'm still a proponent of, a public benefit corporation, where then also, if money is made in that process, what's so wrong with the artist also benefiting financially from their work? And if you're in a nonprofit, they can't benefit from it. So it keeps them in sort of, not a cycle of poverty, but a cycle that's not necessarily helping them generate wealth. And I don't think there's anything wrong with an artist generating wealth. The ones that I've seen do it are very generative afterwards to their community.
Bon, thank you very much. Is there anything else we want to add to this topic about next generation giving to the arts?
No, I mean, you and I were talking before about, and I pulled up the statistic from the report about arts and culture funding. And so to understand that we expected it to boom during the pandemic when tax benefits were much better to folks to be giving to the arts. So while it does say on paper that arts giving went up, we said 2.9% between 2021 to 2022. When you adjust for inflation, it's actually gone down 8.9%. And when you look at all of the other fields, no one's hit really as hard. Nobody's hit really as hard as the arts and culture are. So we do have a real crisis on our hands as we think about how to engage another generation of donors, because we are going through a massive wealth transfer right now. Absolutely. And so how do we make sure that these young folks understand that the arts are actually important to every part of society, which is very much why Artadia gives in 7 cities, to make sure that artists stay in those cities so that the people who live there see the impact of what an artist can do for their community.
Thank you very much for your
welcome.
time,
Thank you,
Patton.
Scott.
I enjoyed
Thank you so much.
Be sure to check out our latest podcast and subscribe to Giving Back is Dead.